I stood on the balcony of our cheap third-floor apartment, watching the city lights blink awake like tiny indifferent witnesses, and felt an odd calm that didn't belong to me, the calm of someone who has already passed the point of return and knows the path ahead will be irrevocable. Sarah had been smiling at breakfast that morning, stirring her coffee with the same crooked thumb I used to love, and when she kissed me I trusted the motion as if it were an automatic prayer. But the week before, I'd found a receipt folded into the lining of her coat, an expensive dinner for two at a restaurant where we'd never been, dated the same night she told me she'd been stuck late at work. I confronted her with trembling hands and a voice that tried to sound steadier than it was. She shrugged, said it was nothing, that people change jobs, change friends, and sometimes they keep parts of life private. The shrug felt like a verdict. I couldn't sleep for nights, each hour stretching into an interrogation where every memory was questioned. I became a quiet presence in our home, an observer cataloging habits and lies. I memorized her routines, how she locked the door, laughed at the exact point in a commercial, what perfume she favored on Thursdays, and I kept a small notebook under my mattress where I wrote dates and times like a man tallying losses. Anger hardened to something surgical, calculated. It was no longer about hurting her for hurt's sake but about reclaiming a property she had sold without asking. I didn't tell my friends, I didn't want their pity or their judgments, I wanted the satisfaction of a clean, undeniable consequence. I started following her once, not in a ragged paranoid way but with an intention, watching where she went after work, checking the cars outside bars, learning the rhythm of her evenings. The more I knew, the sharper my plan became, something that looked for the moment like dignity underlined with menace. The night I finally acted, rain hammered the streets like a curtain hiding the world, and I felt both small and enormous walking toward the place she said she'd be. My palms were dry though the air was wet, and I carried a small backpack with tools that felt ridiculous and inevitable at once. Flashlight, gloves, a cheap camera to catch faces, recording app on my phone set to start. When I stepped in, I waited across the street, shivering under a bus stop shelter, as she emerged laughing with a man I'd never met except in the blur of photos on her phone. His name was Mark, an easy smile and a hand that lingered too long on her lower back. They didn't see me at first, they hailed a cab and disappeared into a night that smelled of wet pavement and perfume. I followed at a distance until they entered a dim motel with a flickering sign, heart in my throat like a trapped animal. I could have left then, walked home and let the wound fester, or gone to a lawyer and called it quits with papers and polite endings, but the ledger in my head was hungry for a sequence, exposure, explanation, ruin. And I chose the ruin that felt personal. That evening I sat in my car with the engine off and thought of all the small betrayals that had led here, the whispered texts, the unfamiliar lipstick on the glass, her laughing about a movie she'd seen with friends, and I realized that what I wanted wasn't simply revenge but to make her understand, with evidence and spectacle, how deep the fracture was. So I recorded, not just evidence of the act but the way they moved, what they said in the pauses, how her voice sounded when she wasn't pretending to be mine. When I released what I gathered, there was a rush like an animal freed, photos and clips sent anonymously to her friends, her parents, even to her employer with a note that read, plainly, "You deserve to know." Messages started appearing, shock, denial, outrage, each one like fuel on a small, controlled fire, but the intended conflagration wasn't instantaneous. People dissected the material, they formed opinions that split into factions. Some called it bravery and honesty, others called it cruelty and warned me about crossing lines I couldn't uncross. Sarah's face changed in photos that circulated, first incredulous, then furious, then tired, in the way of someone who sees the scaffolding of their life taken apart. She texted me once, "Why?" I typed an answer and deleted it, then typed another and deleted that too. What I wanted to say was a messy confession and an indictment all at once. I wanted her to feel the weight of exposure, the same way I'd carried the weight of suspicion for months. Instead, the world did what worlds do. It rearranged itself around the scandal. Her mother called crying. Her boss asked her to come into HR. An ex-boyfriend sent a message that was more gloating than comforting. I watched from the edges as her life trembled. I imagined her panic but also felt a hollowing out in myself, as if wielding the weapon of truth had also cut me. It wasn't purely triumph, it was a complicated corrosion. An understanding that I had become someone who could make a life unravel, and that knowledge tasted like iron. Weeks later, when the dust settled into a new ordinary, there was a reckoning that took a form I hadn't expected. Sarah didn't leave town, she stayed and she stared at me across rooms with a look that could kill softly. Mark stopped answering calls and slipped out of the picture like bad scenery, leaving behind threads of reputation that frayed. Friends chose sides, as friends do, some silenced by awkwardness, others emboldened to speak their own truths to me, and I, who had thought revenge would stitch the wound closed, found only a thin scar that reminded me daily of what I'd done. I lost my job for reasons that had nothing to do with the scandal. Insomnia and distraction had made me air at work, and we were forced into a public custody battle over a dog we'd rescued together. An absurdity that felt almost comic if it weren't so raw. In courtrooms and comment threads alike, I learned something bleak: retribution has a cost and it is always payable. Most nights now I walk alone, passing couples who look like they invented gentleness, and sometimes I think about calling Sarah and apologizing, not for what she did but for what I became. The apology would be inadequate and maybe dishonest because the person I was before isn't coming back. I can't pretend the ledger is balanced because pain doesn't sum neatly, but there's a small aching clarity in admitting the truth. Revenge can teach you who you are, even if the lesson is uglier than you expected. And in the quiet after the storm, I keep the memory of that ugliness like a talisman, an ugly, honest relic of what it cost me to prove a point.